to join you all today. It was as we were trying to figure out exactly how to put this thing together, I was looking for a bright idea, so I decided to have a light bulb for breakfast. We'll see if that works out or not. But rolling blackouts for New Mexico. When we were really starting to talk about this, Clint and Gordon were telling me that the power grid down here in New Mexico is pretty darn strong. We're pretty good, and that's, I think, at least from the big power company side of things. I know in the consortium side, in the various areas of New Mexico, things are maybe a little less stable. But the thing is that even from the big power side, there are some things that maybe you want to think about, and we hope to be maybe plant some seeds with you all today and talk through some things. And please let us know if you have any questions as we go along. But Clint, if you'd be kind enough to maybe go to the next slide, which Clint is going to be driving our slides for us today. And so apologies for any back and forth tennis as we try to get the clicks going. But as mentioned, Clint and Gordon are our two smart guys on the call with us today. Gordon's going to be talking about data center solutions, and Clint is our big power sales. So at the end of this, when we're thinking about how do we mitigate these power challenges and these anomalies that can kind of cause some issues with our operations, hopefully these two guys will be at the top of your mind to reach out to maybe think about how we can kind of work around that with you. Next slide, please. As we were thinking about, the topic, we wanted to kind of figure out, maybe it's the newsman in me that never got a newspaper job or something, but the what, why, who, how, and where in managing these power situations seemed to be a good way to start. And again, wanted to give you guys some things to think about. Clint, if you could go forward, please. In regards to, what's really here? Why are we here? And the fact of it is that rolling blackouts are only a part of the equation. And it is a significant part that we're going to talk about here in a minute, at least something to keep in mind. But the fact of the matter is that the rolling blackouts are only a piece of the puzzle. It's those natural disasters. It's those accidents. It's really Murphy's Law that pop in those little gremlins in your operations probably more often than not. And we need to figure out how to, again, kind of keep them out, try to mitigate them if they do show up, and give you guys some confidence in what you're doing within your operations, and really set a strong foundation on your critical infrastructure to get there. One more slide, please, Clint. So wanted to kind of, again, try to set the stage with some facts. And the fact of the matter is that while New Mexico has a strong power grid, PNM is actually looking to kind of maybe change things up a little bit. If you could give me a highlight there, Clint, on the first paragraph. This is an article that I think came from September of last year, talking about power this coming summer. So, PNM has been dealing with a lot of different things. One thing that really stands out to me that, I don't know if it's a huge push and a huge stress on the New Mexico power grid, but data centers are growing all over your state. Data centers are something that DVL grew up in, and we've been doing power and cooling and critical infrastructure for over 35 years, almost 40 now. And the fact of the matter is that there's a lot of things that kind of go into all of these various pieces of the puzzle, and the power grid is a big piece of it. With these, data centers that really, I believe it's data centers consume 50% more than your standard commercial building. So you take these potential rolling blackouts, you take the fact that PNM actually has the expiring leases and scheduling to lose power from other sources that they're getting power for the state. It really makes you think that these rolling blackouts are a real thing. And I'm not sure how it's going to be rolled out. I'm not sure how it's going to be communicated. I'm sure that you'll get plenty of heads up, but the fact of the matter is that it's coming, and it will be impacting your operations. Now, the power situation, as we mentioned, is only one thing. We need to also focus on Murphy's Law. As we all know, Clint, if you could go forward, I think you guys are sitting in the middle of a snowstorm. I'm actually here up in Denver, just one state up, but we're getting snow today. And all of these various factors are things that really come in, snow, electrical storms, car accidents, wind. All of these things have, if you haven't experienced getting your power knocked out by these Murphy's Law facts, it's the odds are you might at some point down the road. But that's the things that all, rolling power, rolling blackouts, all of these Murphy's Law things. Clint, if you give me that's what we're here to talk about today. It's the things that can impact your business, and it's why, you think maybe this isn't necessarily something I need to think about, but maybe it really is, because when you think about it, Clint, you're the first thing on the top of the thing, on maybe not on the top of your mind as facility managers, but at someone in your organization is your bottom line. Operations equal money. Operations equal people being able to do things. And the thing about the people is that they want to feel security. And they're in I don't know if you've ever been in a dark room, but that's, maybe I'm still scared of the dark a little bit and checking under my bed. But being in a dark room, a dark building with no power is really no fun at all for anyone. And especially in regards to your operations or your data. The fact about the digitization of the world that we're living in, data is becoming more and more important to everything that we're doing, from how we talk, how we communicate, how we do our businesses. And so the security really rolls right into keeping people connected. And there's a certain sense of overlap between all of these things. But the fact of the matter is that different pieces of your facility are really supporting different pieces of the puzzle. And when we think about the who's, right? I know we went through a lot of different people on here. It's great to have you all join us. And we've got a couple of sweet spots when it comes down to who we've been supporting in the past. As I mentioned, we grew up in data centers. We are headquartered up in Philadelphia. That's where we started. A huge data center market there. And as we've expanded DVL to the west here in Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, et cetera, data centers have stayed in our core competency. And that's really the money piece of it, right? Especially as the financial world continues to grow with data and the importance that those backbones are seeing. But at the same time, operations and power impact the world of medicine about as much as anyone. And when Gordon and Clint start speaking and talking about some of the things that are driving people, driving organizations to reinforce their critical infrastructure with various power solutions, sometimes it's just operational and money driven. Sometimes it's law driven. And the healthcare business is one of the ones that really fall into codes and having certain requirements. If you've worked in that area, I'm sure you're very expert with it. But the fact of the matter is that it also goes beyond. You can see educational systems, our businesses, our municipalities. One more click, really even goes even farther than that when we think about cell towers. That's, a core of our, a core way that we're all communicating today with cell phones and everything of that nature. Manufacturing as well as farming. All of these different industries are running some level of a 24/7 operations. And it may not be full people in buildings, full people doing this, but something's going on that needs those powers. And you're going to have to accommodate for whether it's those rolling blackouts from PNM or those Murphy Law moments from the snowstorms like we might see today. So want to just kind of paint the picture in regards to critical infrastructure does impact everyone, especially in the world of business and community and healthcare and everything beyond. So at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Gordon and to really talk about the things to consider when we think about generator versus UPS, or perhaps having both of these types of solutions within your facility and within your operations as a whole.
Thanks, Robert. So I want to touch on we want to talk a little bit about generators in specific and UPS in specific, and I'll let Clint talk about the generators and I'll get into the UPSs. But before we transition to that, I wanted to talk a little bit about why you need one versus the other and or both. Generally speaking, you need a generator if you need backup power. Right? If you're in a situation where you can't be without power, if there's a sustained outage, a generator is going to fill that gap. When power goes out, generator is going to kick on, and it can carry your power load for up to days, depending on the size and the application. A UPS, on the other hand, a UPS is still backup power, but a UPS is, a UPS stands for uninterruptible power supply. So if you are in a situation where you can't lose power even for a second, that's when you're going to use a UPS. And oftentimes you're going to see them used in conjunction with each other. So if you've got a UPS, one of the primary limitations, if you will, is backup time, right? A UPS is running off of DC power, battery power. So you're going to be limited to 5 minutes, 10 minutes Maybe, if you got enough batteries, you can get a couple hours out of a UPS, but it's not a long-term solution like a UPS or like a generator is, excuse me. So generally speaking, a generator is going to be required for backup power longer term, but there is going to be a gap. And then a UPS is going to be used to fill that gap before the generator comes on. If you've got a smaller facility and you don't have any need for a generator, just a UPS, you might go with just a couple of hours of backup and a backup plan with the UPS. But primarily, a lot of the applications we see these days are using both. The generator's coming on, the UPS is used to carry the load during the transition before the generator accepts the power. So just wanted to cover that overview, if you will, and we'll get into more specifics as we go. I'm sure Clint has more to add to that, so I'll let him go from here and we start talking about generators. Clint?
Glad we had that generator. How important is keeping the generator on your facility? Well, what are we doing with our different facilities? Robert briefly touched on why we need them. Do we have life safety factors? Are we dealing with a hospital or a nursing home? Are we worried about dear old Aunt Betty on life support in her hospital room and whenever we lose the power? Is it legally required? Is it something like emergency communications with at a fire station or a 911 call center, or legally required systems are also legally required on life safety systems. Lift stations, water treatment plants. Legally required systems are when there is if we lose our power, it could create a hazard or hamper rescue, or there could potentially be a loss of life because of it, or a hazard to people's health. Critical systems. Is an emergency exhaust system in case of a fire, or any type of critical infrastructure that you might have in your facility, your servers, your emergency lighting, those types of things. Optional standby. Maybe we just want to keep the boss's coffee maker running. After all, he signs our paychecks, and we want to make sure that he's happy. So we want to keep his office refrigerator and his radio going, and his coffee maker, keep him happy. So different factors play in. Now let's decide. I'm sorry about that. Which generator is right for your facility? Do we want a natural gas generator or a propane generator? Where are we located? Are we out in a rural area where we don't have access to natural gas? Everything's run on propane. Are we worried about natural gas supply? Maybe we want a source of on-site fuel storage instead of worrying about all the piping from a natural gas system. So we can go with propane because it's readily available in your area. We also have diesel. Diesel, we're limited to the amount of runtime we have based on our fuel storage tank. But then again, in an area where you don't have propane or ready access to propane, or maybe you need a little bit more power, then diesel might be a factor. Our gaseous units are limited on their size. Or maybe you just need something temporary. Maybe on your facility, we think about putting just an emergency generator docking station. And then we rent a generator and roll it up and plug it in. How big is your load on your business? Are we just talking about backing up a server? Are we talking about backing up servers and HVAC systems? The size of your load is going to dictate how big your generator is, what type of fuel you have to actually use for your generator based on your load. If you have, a small server room where you don't need a whole lot of power, then great. We can probably get away with the gaseous if you want to, or some of the smaller diesel units. If you're backing up the entire facility, then we need to think about, okay, can I get away with, say 1,000 kW natural gas? Okay, now we got to take into account, elevation. 1,000 kW at our elevation, for instance, you're going to get maybe about 900 kW. Okay, it's like your body. The higher you get, the harder it is to breathe. Same with generators. But diesel, well, of course, we can go considerably larger, and diesel has a lot less, pardon me, a lot less derate factor. So it might be able to provide more power at your elevation. Mobile generators, we're limited, of course, on size, because it's kind of hard to roll around something that's 2,000 kW. It's not real easy. What type of enclosures do you want? I mean, these are all different things that we need to look into. How many circuit breakers do you want to isolate your loads? Do you want to break up the different areas of your building? Maybe you want to back up life safety, critical, and just a set of equipment and put priorities on. What takes priority on starting based on the size, the load coming out of the generator that's available. Then, let's talk about data. I mean, do we need that uninterruptible part that Gordon mentioned? Generator is going to take on average about 10 to 15 seconds to start and connect to the building load. Well, during that portion, you have the gap. Okay, you're going to have a glitch in your power, a little tiny blurb where there is no power before the generator starts up. So maybe we need to add a UPS on it. So Gordon is going to talk to us about UPSs.
All right. So thank you, Clint. As I mentioned before, so we're talking kind of generator versus UPS, or generator and UPS. One of the big questions is talking about what your end needs are, right? So why do you need a UPS, or why do you need a generator? I wanted to talk about that. Just in brief, if you generally want to have a UPS if you need to avoid damage caused by an outage. If you've got something hooked up to power that will be damaged if it stops during the middle of a process. Now it can be a server, right? Think Facebook, Instagram, places like that where they just don't want any outage because it's going to cause an interruption and it's a long time to start back up. Or you can think of, a good example that came up recently was a company that sells 3D printers. Some of these 3D printed projects are very expensive. And if you lose power halfway through, you've got to start over. It restarts the whole process, and that can be very costly. So another reason why you might need a UPS is to ensure availability of the networks. So thinking in terms of like a 911 call center, an emergency services department that just can't be out even for a minute. It's got to have available, people have got to have access to it. Banking institutions, financial institutions, places where if they lose power and they lose, their system goes down without a graceful, crossover or shutdown process, then it's going to be costly to them, but also it could cause issues with regards to the institutions or the organizations that they belong to. So in other words, financial institutions. I've mentioned before, think of casinos. If you're in the middle of, you've got a really busy time, you got a bunch of slot machines growing, and suddenly there's an outage, and then everyone's screaming, wait, I was just about to hit the jackpot. So you might have issues with the gaming control center. So why you need a UPS is going to depend on the application. Generally speaking, if you're in a situation where you can't go down, you can't lose power at all for a second, that's when you're going to want to have a UPS. Go back if you could. Sorry. I just wanted to touch on this a little bit because Clint talked about generators. I'm talking about UPSs. When you put a system together, you're going to want to have some type of a diagram like this. This is a rough one-line diagram, right? And this can be a sketch. If you look at a set of blueprints, a lot of times there's an official engineer put together a whole sheet on a one-line diagram. It's going to look a little bit like this. They've got more symbols and stuff, but this gives you an idea about the components, right? So you've got a generator and you've got a utility power on the top left there feeding. Then you're going to have a transfer switch. That's so that you're not going to get dual feed, right? You don't want utility power and generator power or UPS power coming into your components at the same time. You're going to have a transfer switch that controls, okay, once it senses utility power goes out, then it turns the generator on and it sends the signal to the UPS to carry the load until the generator is back on. So it's kind of like a electrical traffic director. There are some other components involved in here. You're going to have electrical panels. You're going to have possibly transformers if you've got to step down the power. But I wanted to include this drawing just because this is a critical piece. And if you're thinking in terms of, do I need a UPS? Do I need a generator? Do I need both? And how are we going to integrate those into the systems? This would be one of the starting places. You want to have a general idea about where the load is going to go and what is feeding upstream and downstream of the UPS. The pictures down below, these are just for reference. So I've got a generator, example of switchgear, the UPS itself. The black picture right there in the middle at the bottom, that's the UPS. That whole thing isn't the UPS though. The UPS is like the little cabinet on the left side. Then you're going to have a battery cabinet. We'll get into the next. So next slide, Clint. Talking about the parts of a UPS. And this really comes down to kind of what the UPS does. I don't want to get too far into the weeds, too technical, if you will. Some of you are going to understand this better than others, depending on what your background is. UPS has some primary components of the rectifier, right? So when you're bringing the power in, you're essentially converting it from AC power to DC power and then back again. And little caveat, not all UPSs do it that way. There are different ways. Some just have AC feed all the way through and a DC feed charge in the background that will take over. But generally speaking, most UPSs, the large UPSs, are going to transfer from AC power to DC and then back again. And that way you've got a continuous charge through these batteries, but also helps you have instantaneous crossover if there is a power outage, right? So the rectifier does that. In the meantime, the rectifier also helps to mitigate buffers from surges, spikes, small brownouts, things like that. So it's cleaning the power up a little bit as it goes through. The inverter, on the other hand, goes from the DC to AC. And again, that regulates it. So it's just a final check to make sure the power's clean as it's coming by. There's a bypass inside. And I want to be clear on this because there's a difference between a static bypass and a maintenance bypass. And then you see at the bottom of the sheet, there's a maintenance bypass listed. The static bypass inside the UPS is essentially a safety for the UPS itself. to prevent dual feed, to prevent a dual input into the DC load, into the batteries. So it's protecting the batteries. Batteries are expensive. They cost a lot of money to replace, so you do want to protect them. The static bypass helps that, but it also helps bypass internally, right? If we're not using it, right? So the UPS isn't even engaged. We don't need to. We'll have a trickle charge going to the batteries, but we don't have to run the power through them. So that's separate from the maintenance bypass. I'll come back to that. The last piece, primary piece of the internal piece of a UPS is going to be a transformer. Now, this is only if it's needed. Sometimes, you know, on the previous drawing, I showed the one line, you'll see that the UPS might be feeding a panel and the panel itself is feeding equipment downstream from that, right? So if you're going to go from a 480 volt utility power into the UPS and you have a 480 volt output and it feeds a transformer downstream, you don't need you don't need a transformer inside of the UPS. But a lot of applications are using it. So you've got the transformer inside the UPS and you step down the power as you need it. So again, it's going to depend on the particular application, but that's the last primary component inside the UPS itself. Now, with regards to a UPS system, 3 primary components of the UPS I just talked about, and then you're going to have battery cabinets. Battery cabinets are going to be a big part of the cost of the first cost of the UPS, also the maintenance of the UPS. So it's really important that you determine how much time do I need. If you've got a generator on site and it's going to come in and accept a load in 15 seconds, then you only need a minimal amount of backup time on a UPS. Now, just so you know, and you're not surprised when you ask for it, there aren't any UPSs out there that provide, at least at the large 3-phase, that provide 1 minute of backup time. It's just got to do with the transfer of load, right? When you're going with large electrical loads like that, you can't really carry a small amount for a small time. So generally speaking, a UPS, the minimum is going to be 3 to 5 minutes. The benefit being it gives you a little bit of time in case there is a delay in the generator starting. And if you're really serious about not having any downtime, that's going to be critical. So the battery cabinets are going to be usually connected to the UPS, but they don't have to. They can be VRLA batteries. VRLA is valve regulated lead acid. So those are the kinds of batteries you'll see in a vehicle, boats, RVs, same type of battery. They're generally cheaper, but they don't last quite as long. One of the new options out there now is lithium ion batteries. They're a little higher first cost, but they give you a longer life and they also take less footprint. So again, once you get into selecting a UPS, that will be one of the conversations. I just saw the question pop up, what about flywheel? And that's good. I'll touch on that separately. But in either case, you're going to have this UPS, you're going to have something charging the power source, right? So you've got these batteries and or a flywheel. And you know what, let me go ahead and just touch on that now. A flywheel is, instead of having batteries, right? If a UPS has battery cabinets, it's going to be a cabinet filled with 40 batteries that look like car batteries. And you might have 4, 5, even 6 more of those. Sometimes instead of using DC power from a battery, they use flywheel, and that is basically using stored kinetic energy. So what's happening is you've got it's essentially a large cylinder with a flywheel attached. It's weighted specifically so that it can store energy and then release that energy as needed, just like a DC power would, except you're using instead of just a chemical reaction that's taking place inside of a battery, you're using a physical component in the motion, which is generating the power. So I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but yes, good point. Great question. Flywheel is an option. In either case, it's going to be batteries or flywheel, and that's going to be the second component from within the UPS. The maintenance bypass is the third primary component. And I say primary because there's some other components as well, but maintenance bypass isn't always needed. It is almost always recommended though. Maintenance bypass, what that allows you to do is to take utility feed and pass it through without going to the UPS. UPS we're talking about high voltage equipment. There are codes in place that say you can't open up the cabinet. If you need to work on something, you can't open up a 480 volt piece of equipment while it's powered. And if you've got critical components, servers, desktops, whatever the case is, other life safety things downstream of this UPS, you won't be able to basically maintain or do any maintenance on the UPS itself without shutting all of that down unless you've got a maintenance bypass. So the picture on the right here shows a little bit what we're talking about, the bypass distribution cabinet or maintenance bypass. As you can see, so the power goes through there and it has internal breakers. So if you needed to work on the UPS or you needed to change out the batteries or work on a flywheel, then you can turn these breakers off, and that allows the utility power to pass right straight through, and that gives you the chance to work on those. So it looked like there was another question that came on, but I didn't see it. So, all right, Clint, next slide. Okay, so we just wanted to circle back around. I mean, I could talk forever about UPS. Ask anybody who's heard me, they'll attest. And if you have any questions, obviously, we'll give you the opportunity to reach out or ask us questions at the end. But before we do that, when we get too deep into it, I want to circle back around. We talked about power outages and rolling blackouts. Now that you've heard a little bit about UPSs and generators, I'm going to let Robert kind of circle back to the original component and wrap it up before we take some questions. Robert?
Yeah. Thank you, Gordon. I think, we've talked about a few things here this morning, and the keys is that no one's going to know your facilities better than you do. And in the sense of like, David, I know no one's going to know the NFPA codes that drive those things better than probably you do on this call. Pardon me, I feel like I've about to get a little sneeze in my nose, but the fact of the matter is, Clint, if you just want to move forward with those next couple of clicks, just to reiterate that there's a lot of things driving operations, people safety, the money coming in and out, paying paychecks, earning revenue, et cetera, at all of your facilities. No one's going to know kind of the ins and outs better than you, and really requires the requirements of your critical infrastructure better than you. And those requirements are going to come from a few different areas, right? Maybe it was Clint's version of keeping that little mini fridge in your boss's office, probably a little bit something a little bit more critical than that, but it's a good thing to keep in mind. And maybe it's that, those 3D printers that Gordon brought up, driving, a huge expense loss if that thing stops, 80% in. You just have to start over no matter what. And the things and to keep in mind are, what are those things for you? Is it load? Is it time? Is it whatever the case is? And the fact is, this all going to be somewhat standard in the fact you're going to need a generator or possibly need the UPS as well, maybe multiple UPSs all across your facility. And the things is that all of these things, while standard, need to be customized to your facility. And that's where Gordon and Clint can come in and assist in driving that. And a little bit more in regards to DVL and how we can assist all of your critical infrastructure in regards to both the products. As Gordon mentioned, we handle uninterruptible power. In addition to the uninterruptible power, all of those data, the servers, the switches, and everything else that is getting the power from the UPSs create a lot of heat, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with. We also handle the cooling solutions behind that, at precision cooling at the rack level, all the way up to data center cooling. Same thing for the 3-phase power that Gordon spoke to a lot. We also have single-phase smaller power solutions. But even beyond the UPSs and the generators, that one slide that Gordon shared where it had transfer switches and PLCs and whatever else was driving that, we handle all of those types of critical infrastructure needs at the product level. We have relationships with manufacturers, world-class, that have been providing these types of solutions and products for a long time, and we can help you find the right fits for your facility. And in addition to that, you can see that beyond the product is a part of our tagline. It's something we take to heart in a lot of ways. And it starts with Gordon and Clint and the expertise that they bring to make sure that you get the right product. But then it goes even further. And whether that's even pre-installation and you may need some assistance with turnkey solutions or engineering, even beyond what Gordon and Clint have, we have a whole lot of people that can bring expertise to your challenges. And I mean that by maybe you've got old equipment that you're trying to retrofit your facility and, it's 10, 15, 20 years old and you're needing a new transfer switch or a whole new power control system. We can assist with that as well. And then lastly, once all of your project is kind of the dust is settled a little bit, you want to extend the life of that equipment for as long as possible. And we also handle maintenance and emergency services for critical infrastructure. That is power, that is cooling, that is pretty much all of your needs in regards to that. So when you think, when we think, I'll say, of the facility managers in New Mexico, we want to be, a consultative partner. We want to be someone you can rely on and someone that you can just come and, get what you need and be able to sleep a little bit better at night once you get it. So with that, I think that's pretty much the gist of what we wanted to share with everyone today. But, outside of a few questions that have popped up, we would love to address any other questions that are looming on your mind that maybe have something to do with, these power outages, the conditioned power that feeds your facility, whether at the generator level or beyond.
Hey, quick question here. First, thanks for doing this and bringing it to our attention. That was really informative. I'm just wondering what a rolling blackout would look like. Is there any kind of forecasting from P&M or any sources that would say, hey, we're expecting blackouts to last a few minutes, a few hours, days? What can we expect that to look like if we were to do nothing to get a generator? What would we expect time-wise to be down?
I'll jump in here and take this. As far as I know, we don't have any defined plan from P&M, right? These are just reports talking about, generally speaking, what the power requirements and the power usage of the state look like versus what their capacities are and abilities to provide that. The other part is that, and someone mentions it in one of the other questions here, there is a big push for renewables, and P&M is working on increasing the percentage of their power that is provided by solar, right? So there's some changes going on within P&M that are, either driven by their internal processes or the state. But they haven't come out and said, okay, we're planning on rolling blackouts. This report came from essentially it's other sources who are saying, okay, given what's happening at P&M and also given the growth of the state, here's something that we might go through and, we might be experiencing. And they're also looking at how these things occurred in other places, right? California is the first one that comes to mind. We've all heard about power outages in California and the rolling blackouts and everything like that. So a lot of times these are just industry experts who are looking at this and saying, okay, we're seeing some of the same trends here and we're going in the same direction. So to answer your question, we don't have any specifics that I'm aware of as far as it will happen this frequently or each one will take that long. Generally speaking, a rolling blackout isn't going to do a whole lot to help any power supplier if it's talking about minutes. It's going to be hours. It's going to be a couple of hours before, and it's going to affect, usually they'll do it in a sequence, right? So it could be this part of their grid and then to the next grid, and they'll have a map and they'll publish it and say, okay, it'll be almost like a trash pickup schedule, right? You guys who live in this area have your trash out on Tuesdays and that sort of thing. So it'll be kind of like that. As far as I know, if we get to this point, I think P&M's been pretty good about being transparent for the most part. So I don't think it would be anything that we'd be surprised by. If we got to that point, I think they would definitely come out and say, here's what to expect and here's how we do it, but we don't have those details right now.
Understood. Thanks. And I saw on your presentation that they're expecting their new long-term solution to be complete in 2024. Is there, a quarter or a date that they have targeted for completion, or is it just 2024?
I missed the first part of that. Is the expected completion for what?
They expected their new project that is supposed to be the long-term power solution. Their alternative plan to be complete in 2024. So
Right.
It looked like we would expect to see rolling blackouts starting October 1st, and that they would have a solution in place in 2024. Is that right? Did I understand that correctly?
Well, I think again, so the San Juan generating station, of course, this is the article in there. The San Juan generating station is shutting down October 1st, and so that's going to affect the power supply from the San Juan generating station, from the Four Corners area into the PNM grid. They've got other processes in place, like I said, to offset that, but those aren't necessarily going to be available. Now, they don't have, according to all the research and everything that I've done and that I've seen, there isn't anything set saying, okay, we expect to be short by 2 megawatts or 200 kilowatts, whatever the case is. They're just saying, hey, we've been getting power from this power station and it's shutting down, but there's going to be a gap between that and when our other alternatives are in place, right? And some of the solar additions that they're adding, things like that. There's no certainty that it's going to mean any of those runs into a rolling blackout. As we get closer to October 1st, I imagine we're going to start seeing more of this in the press. They're going to have a plan. If they get there and they're saying, okay, look, power has increased and these other projects aren't finished, because it's not just one, there's several projects going on at PNM. But if we get to that point where they say, okay, we think there's going to be an issue, then they'll go ahead with planned power outages or put a plan in place to say, if we come up short, this is how we'll handle it. And at that point, it'll be on the news because you'll have state governors, or the governor and the state senators and representatives talking about it. It'll be I don't think it's something that will catch us off guard. You're not just going to be surprised by it. That being said, and because I don't want to be too cautionary, but also, the importance behind what we do is backup power for emergency situations. It's not just a rolling blackout. There are other things going wrong. So if you're in a situation where you need backup power, you should definitely be looking at the solutions that we've talked about with or without regard to the rolling blackouts in PNM.
That's all great. So thanks.
Yep.
I think we need to wrap this up. I think very interesting information. We could talk about this all day, I'm sure, and all the technical issues, but when it's all said and done, we appreciate you doing this, and people know where to turn if they have questions or concerns. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to remind everybody that this will be archived on the FMA website. So if there's something you'd like to share with your fellow workers or let somebody else know that you found value in this presentation, you can always review it on our website.
All right. Anybody else before we adjourn?
I want to reach out and say, hey, we appreciate the opportunity to present this to you guys. We, always want to get out there and, get the message out. Yeah, we like to sell things, but you know what? We like to provide information and give people the tools to be solutions providers.
Great job, DVL. Thank you, Clint and Gordon and Robert. And we appreciate your support. Look forward to seeing y'all next month. We'll be over at National Roofing, looking at how you can reconfigure walls in your facility quickly and easily and affordably. So hang in there with us, everybody, and have a great day.